The evening rush at Bellini's Italian restaurant was in full swing. The clinking of glasses mingled with the hum of conversation as May worked her way between tables, balancing plates of steaming pasta and fresh bread. Her feet ached in the black non-slip shoes she'd bought secondhand, but she kept a genuine smile on her face as she refilled water glasses and took dessert orders. "Table 7 needs their check, and 12 just got seated," called out Tony, the floor manager, as May passed the kitchen. She nodded, tucking a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear. 6 more hours to go, and then she could head home to study for tomorrow's exam. Community college wasn't going to pay for itself, and neither was her tiny apartment with the leaky faucet that the landlord kept promising to fix. In the corner of the restaurant sat a baby grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the warm glow of the overhead lights. Usually an older gentleman named Frank played soft melodies during dinner hours, his fingers dancing across the keys while guests enjoyed their meals. Tonight, though, the piano sat silent. Frank had called in sick, something about his arthritis acting up again. May glanced at the empty piano bench as she delivered a plate of tiramisu to an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary. The woman caught her looking. "No music tonight?" she asked, her wrinkled face showing disappointment. "I'm afraid not," May replied. "Our pianist is under the weather." The woman sighed. "Such a shame. We were looking forward to it." May felt a twinge of guilt, though it wasn't her fault. She knew how much the live music added to the atmosphere of Bellini's. It was one of the things that set the restaurant apart from the dozens of other Italian places in the city. Back at the service station, May was entering orders into the computer when Tony appeared beside her, looking stressed. He ran a hand through his thinning hair and glanced anxiously toward the restaurant's entrance. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice low. "The Blackwood party just confirmed they're still coming in tonight. 15 people, including some big-shot music professor and his colleagues from the conservatory. They specifically mentioned looking forward to the live music." May winced. The Blackwood party had reserved the private dining room weeks ago, and they were known for leaving generous tips. "Can't we just play some recorded piano music?" Tony shook his head. "They've been here before. They know we have live music on Thursdays. I've already called 3 other pianists, but nobody's available on such short notice." Just then, the owner of Bellini's, Mrs. Rossi, emerged from her office. In her 60s with salt and pepper hair always pulled into a neat bun, she ran the restaurant with efficient warmth, treating her staff like extended family. "What's this about the piano?" she asked, having overheard their conversation. Tony explained the situation, his words tumbling out faster as he described the importance of the Blackwood reservation. Mrs. Rossi frowned, her eyes scanning the restaurant as if hoping a pianist might materialize among the diners. Then her gaze landed on May. "You play, don't you?" she asked. May froze, a drink order half entered into the system. "What? The piano? You play. I remember it was on your application." Mrs. Rossi's tone wasn't questioning, it was stating a fact. Heat crept up May's neck. Yes, she had listed piano under skills on her application 2 years ago, but that had been an automatic addition, a habit from years of including it on every form since childhood. "That was a long time ago," May said quickly. "I haven't played seriously in years." Tony looked between them, hope dawning on his face. "You could fill in for Frank? Just for tonight?" "No," May said more sharply than she intended. She lowered her voice. "I mean, I couldn't possibly. I haven't performed in front of people since—" She stopped herself, unwilling to finish the sentence. Mrs. Rossi stepped closer, her eyes kind but determined. "May, we need you. Just some background music, nothing fancy. These conservatory people won't even be paying attention. They'll be too busy eating and talking." May's stomach knotted. If only they knew who might be in that group. If only they knew why she had stopped playing. "Please," Tony added. "I'll cover half your tables and you can keep all the tips from the Blackwood party." The offer was tempting. Extra money meant maybe she could finally get her car fixed instead of taking 3 buses to get to school each morning. But the thought of sitting at that piano, exposed and vulnerable, made her palms sweat. "I don't even have anything to wear," she tried, gesturing at her black pants and white button-up shirt, spotted with small stains from the evening's work. Mrs. Rossi waved this concern away. "I keep a spare blouse in my office, dark blue, very elegant. It should fit you well enough for one night." May felt the walls closing in. Part of her wanted to blurt out the whole story, about the prestigious conservatory audition 4 years ago, about the panel of judges who had sat stone-faced as she played, about the rejection letter that came 2 weeks later stating she lacked emotional depth despite her technical proficiency, about how she had closed the piano lid in her parents' home that day and hadn't opened it since. Instead, she just nodded, feeling like she was watching herself from outside her body. "Okay, just for tonight." Relief washed over Tony's face. "You're a lifesaver, May. Truly." Mrs. Rossi squeezed her shoulder. "I always thought there was something special about you." Musicians have a certain look in their eyes. Before May could respond, the older woman was already heading back to her office to retrieve the promised blouse. An hour later, May found herself sitting at the baby grand, dressed in Mrs. Rossi's dark blue silk blouse that was slightly too large but tucked neatly into her black pants. Her hair had been quickly arranged into a presentable bun by Alicia, one of the other waitresses who had cosmetology training. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. The restaurant had filled up completely, with the Blackwood party settling into the private dining room visible through a wide archway. May could see them, 13 men and women in business attire, laughing and talking as they examined menus and sipped at their first round of drinks. She forced herself to look away before she could scan their faces too carefully. Better not to know if he was among them. Professor Harlow, the one who had called her playing technically perfect but soulless during her audition feedback. The one whose cutting remarks had sliced through her confidence like a knife through butter. Taking a deep breath, May pressed her fingers to the keys and began to play. She chose a simple piece, one she had learned as a child and could practically play in her sleep. The notes came back to her like old friends, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. The muscle memory remained even after all this time. For the first 15 minutes, she kept to easy, familiar tunes, gentle background music that wouldn't draw attention. Most diners barely glanced her way, focused on their meals and conversations. This wasn't so bad, May thought. She could get through one evening. Then she heard a burst of laughter from the private room, louder than before. Despite her better judgment, May looked up. The Blackwood party had received their appetizers, and a man at the head of the table was gesturing dramatically, clearly the center of attention. Even from a distance, she recognized the silver-streaked beard and round glasses, Professor Harlow. Her fingers slipped, hitting a wrong note that jangled discordantly through the restaurant. A few heads turned. May quickly recovered, transitioning into another piece, but her heart hammered in her chest. Of all the nights for him to be here, of all the restaurants in the city, it had to be tonight at Bellini's, where she was being forced to face the very thing she had run from for years. The knowledge that he was just 30 feet away, separated only by an archway, made her hands grow clammy. What if he recognized her? What if he came over and remembered her as the failed pianist who hadn't been good enough? Or worse, what if he didn't remember her at all? May forced herself to breathe evenly. She was being ridiculous. It had been 4 years. She looked different now. More mature, her hair longer, her face thinner from working long hours and sometimes skipping meals to save money. She wasn't the eager 19-year-old in a carefully chosen audition outfit anymore. And yet, as she continued to play, every note felt like a potential mistake, every pause between songs an opportunity for disaster. She watched from the corner of her eye as servers delivered more wine to the private room, as conversations grew louder and more animated. Just get through the next few hours, she told herself. Play the simplest pieces, stay invisible. But as the evening progressed, something unexpected happened. The more May played, the more the familiar feeling of losing herself in the music returned. Her fingers moved more freely, finding melodies she hadn't thought about in years. Despite her anxiety, despite Professor Harlow's presence in the next room, the piano began to feel like a refuge rather than an exposure. When Mrs. Rossi stopped by to check on her during a brief break, she squeezed May's shoulder. "You play beautifully," she said softly. "Why didn't you tell us?" May looked down at her hands. "It's complicated." Mrs. Rossi nodded as if she understood. "Music often is. But you have a gift, dear. Thank you for sharing it tonight." As she walked away, May felt something shift inside her, a small crack in the wall she had built around this part of herself. She flexed her fingers and returned to the keys, this time choosing a piece she had composed herself years ago, something that had never been played for anyone else. The notes flowed from her memory, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. It wasn't perfect. There were hesitations, moments where she had to feel her way through passages she couldn't quite remember. But there was something honest in the imperfection, something real that had been missing from her technically flawless audition piece all those years ago. May didn't notice when the conversations in the restaurant gradually quieted, didn't see the appreciative glances from nearby diners. She didn't realize that in the private room, Professor Harlow had paused mid-sentence. His head tilted slightly as he listened to the unfamiliar melody drifting through the archway. For those few minutes, May existed only in the space between the notes, rediscovering a part of herself she had tried so hard to forget. As the night wore on, May continued playing, moving between classical pieces and gentle jazz standards that Frank usually performed. The restaurant had settled into that comfortable late-evening rhythm, with most tables lingering over dessert and coffee. The soft glow of the dimmed lights created pools of warmth throughout the dining room, and the smell of espresso mingled with the sweet scent of tiramisu and cannoli. May had almost forgotten about Professor Harlow and his colleagues in the private dining room. Almost, but not quite. Every time the door opened as servers went in and out, she felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. But she kept playing, letting her fingers find their way across the keys while her mind drifted between memories and melodies. She was just finishing a Debussy piece when Tony appeared at her elbow. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly, setting a glass of water on a napkin near the edge of the piano. "Better than I expected," May admitted, taking the water gratefully during her brief pause between songs. Her fingers were stiff from the unaccustomed exercise after years away from regular playing. "How's the Blackwood party?" Tony grimaced slightly. "They're demanding, but they seem to be enjoying themselves. They've gone through 4 bottles of our reserve wine already." He hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Rossi wants to know if you'd be willing to play for another hour. We usually close at 11, but they've asked to stay later, and they're spending enough that she wants to accommodate them." May glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already past 10. Her exam tomorrow wasn't until the afternoon, but she'd planned to study early in the morning before her shift at the coffee shop that preceded her classes. "I'll pay you double for the extra hour," Tony added quickly, seeing her hesitation. Money won out over sleep. "Okay," May agreed. "1 more hour." Tony squeezed her shoulder in thanks before hurrying off to attend to another table. May took a deep breath and began a gentle rendition of Clair de Lune, one of the few pieces she'd continued to play occasionally over the years. When her roommates were out and she could use the electronic keyboard with headphones, the restaurant had thinned out considerably, with only a handful of tables still occupied besides the private room. The more relaxed atmosphere allowed May to play with greater freedom, adding subtle variations to familiar tunes, letting her fingers explore the keyboard with growing confidence. She was so absorbed in the music that she didn't notice immediately when the door to the private dining room swung open wide and stayed that way. A burst of laughter from inside finally caught her attention. The Blackwood party had grown louder as the night progressed, their voices carrying more clearly now that the restaurant was quieter. "Absolutely magnificent wine," a booming voice declared. "Rosalind, you outdid yourself with the restaurant choice this time." "The food was acceptable," came another voice, this one crisp and precise, a voice May recognized instantly. "Professor Harlow, though I maintain that authentic Italian cuisine is nearly impossible to find in this city." May kept playing, her eyes fixed on the keys, willing herself to become invisible. Just a background element like the paintings on the walls or the candles on the tables. Nothing to notice. Nothing to remark upon. It almost worked. The conversation in the private room shifted to music, inevitable given that most of them were from the conservatory. May could hear fragments more clearly now that several of them had raised their voices, warmed by good food and expensive wine. "Did you hear about the changes to the winter showcase format? Ridiculous. Standards dropping everywhere these days. Speaking of which, auditions next month will be interesting. Word is that Chen's protege is applying. God help us all. Another technical perfectionist with the emotional range of a teaspoon." More laughter, loud enough that Mrs. Rossi, who was chatting with the elderly couple at a nearby table, glanced toward the private room with a slight frown. May focused harder on her playing, trying to block out their voices. The song she was working through now was more complex, requiring her full attention. She was rusty, and some passages weren't coming as smoothly as they once had. Then disaster struck. The private room door swung fully open as a tall man stepped out, swaying slightly. He was younger than Professor Harlow, perhaps in his late 30s, with perfectly styled brown hair and an expensive-looking suit. He paused, catching himself on the doorframe, then turned toward the piano with an exaggerated movement. "Ah, the mysterious pianist," he called out loud enough that the few remaining diners turned to look. "Been wondering who's been providing our soundtrack all evening." May kept her head down, continuing to play, though her heart was suddenly pounding. Maybe if she ignored him, he'd go back inside. No such luck. The man strolled toward the piano, his gait just a touch unsteady. He was followed by a woman in a deep red dress and another man, both looking amused and slightly embarrassed by their colleague's behavior. "Don't mind David," the woman said as they approached. "He gets theatrical after his third glass of wine." David leaned against the piano, peering down at May. "You're not the usual fellow." The old guy with the comb-over. "Frank is ill tonight," May replied quietly, still playing though her fingers had begun to tremble. "I'm just filling in." David studied her for a moment. "You work here?" "I've seen you before, haven't I? Carrying plates?" Heat crept up May's neck. "Yes, I'm a server here." The woman looked surprised. "A server who plays piano? How versatile." By now their conversation had drawn attention. Professor Harlow appeared in the doorway of the private room, observing the scene with a frown. Behind him, several other members of the party were watching with interest. "What's going on?" someone called from inside. "David's interrogating the piano girl," the second man replied loudly enough for everyone to hear. May wished the floor would open and swallow her whole. She finished the piece she was playing and moved her hands to her lap, hoping they would take the hint and return to their party. Instead, David snapped his fingers as if struck by an idea. Wait. This is perfect. We've been discussing the decline of musical education all evening." He turned toward Professor Harlow. "Arthur, come hear this." The waitress plays piano. Professor Harlow approached slowly, his expression unreadable behind his round glasses. Mee kept her eyes lowered, praying he wouldn't recognize her. 4 years was a long time, and she had been just one of dozens of hopeful students he'd evaluated that day. "How quaint," Professor Harlow said, his voice cool and measured. He glanced at May, then back at David. "Perhaps we should return to our table." I believe Mrs. Blackwood was about to propose a toast. May felt a rush of relief. They were leaving. This awkward moment would pass. Then David spoke again, his voice taking on a challenging tone. No, this is too perfect to pass up. "Tell me." He looked at May expectantly. "May?" she supplied reluctantly. "Tell me, May, what's your background? Conservatory training? Private lessons?" The question hung in the air. Mrs. Rossi had appeared nearby, clearly sensing trouble. She took a step forward, but May gave a small shake of her head. "Running away would only make this worse." "I studied from childhood through high school," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I auditioned for the Mitchell Conservatory 4 years ago but wasn't accepted." There was a flicker of something in Professor Harlow's expression. Not recognition, but interest. "Mitchell? That's our institution," David laughed too loudly. "Well, that explains it. No offense, but there must have been a reason, right?" The woman in the red dress elbowed him sharply. "David, that's enough." But David was too far gone in his wine-fueled performance to stop. "No, this is a teachable moment. Arthur is always saying how we need to engage with the community more." He turned to May with an exaggerated gesture. "Play something for us. Something challenging. Show us what Mitchell missed out on." May felt as if she'd been doused in ice water. "I don't think—" "Oh, come on," David pressed. "What about something impressive? Rachmaninoff. His Piano Concerto No. 3? First movement would do." A few gasps came from the doorway where other members of the party had gathered to watch. Even someone with minimal musical knowledge would recognize that as one of the most technically demanding piano pieces ever written. Professor Harlow frowned deeply. "That's quite enough, David. You're embarrassing yourself and all of us." But the damage was done. The challenge hung in the air, and May felt the weight of every pair of eyes on her. The elderly couple at their table, the remaining diners, the staff who had paused in their closing duties to watch the scene unfold, and worst of all, the group of musical professionals from the very institution that had rejected her. Her hands trembled in her lap. Rachmaninoff's third was beyond her abilities even when she had been practicing 4 hours a day. After years away from serious playing, attempting it would be humiliating. David seemed to read her hesitation correctly. His smile took on a smug edge. Too difficult? Understandable. Maybe something simpler then. A little Mozart? Twinkle, twinkle, little star? Someone in the group snickered. May felt a hot flush of shame spreading across her face. Professor Harlow stepped forward. "That is enough," he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to silencing rooms full of students. "We are guests here, and you are behaving abominably." He turned to May. "Please accept my apologies for my colleague's behavior." The wine has clearly affected his judgment. May nodded stiffly, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Mrs. Rossi moved closer, her expression thunderous. "I think perhaps it's time for your party to settle their bill," she said, her usual warmth completely absent. David had the grace to look embarrassed, but the damage was done. The moment stretched awkwardly until a voice spoke from the back of the room. "Play your own piece." It was Tony, standing near the bar with a tray of clean glasses. "The one you were playing earlier. The one you wrote." All eyes turned to him, then back to May. She stared at Tony in disbelief. How had he known that piece was her own composition? She'd never told anyone here about her writing music. "You write your own music?" the woman in the red dress asked, genuine interest in her voice. May hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Well then," Professor Harlow said quietly, "perhaps we should hear that instead." Faced with the choice between slinking away in humiliation or playing, May made her decision. She would play. Not Rachmaninoff, not Mozart, her own voice. The piece she had started earlier, the one she had composed during the darkest period after her rejection. When playing the works of the masters had felt like reopening a wound. She turned back to the piano, positioned her hands over the keys, and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The first notes hung in the air like droplets of water, clear and pristine. Mee closed her eyes, shutting out the staring faces, the restaurant, everything except the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers. This piece had never been played for anyone before. It existed only in her mind and in the privacy of rare moments when she allowed herself to remember. She had composed it during those first devastating weeks after the rejection letter arrived. The piece had no formal name, though in her mind, she called it After Falling. It began softly, hesitantly, like someone testing whether they could stand again after being knocked down. The melody was simple at first, almost childlike in its directness. No complicated flourishes, no technical showpieces meant to impress, just raw feeling translated into sound, the kind of emotional depth that Professor Harlow had claimed she lacked. As her fingers moved across the keys, the restaurant faded away. May didn't see David's smirk dissolve into surprise, didn't notice Professor Harlow's eyebrows raise slightly, didn't register the way conversation stopped at the remaining tables as everyone turned to listen. The piece built gradually, gaining complexity and confidence. A counter-melody emerged in her left hand, intertwining with the right in a conversation that felt like arguing with oneself, like working through grief. There were dissonant chords that resolved unexpectedly, creating tension and release that mirrored the emotional journey of picking oneself up after failure. May lost herself in the music. 4 years of bottled emotions poured through her fingers. The disappointment, the shame, the anger at herself for giving up so easily. The quiet regret that had become her constant companion. But there was something else too, something she hadn't recognized when she first wrote the piece. Resilience. The melody kept returning, changed but undefeated. Without fully realizing it, May began to improvise, expanding on her original composition. The music took on new dimensions as she worked through feelings she hadn't allowed herself to examine. What might have happened if she hadn't closed the piano lid that day? What other paths might she have explored instead of burying her passion? The piece grew in intensity, building toward something that felt like acceptance, not of defeat, but of a different kind of journey. The technical skills she'd honed through years of practice were evident, but they served the emotion of the piece rather than showcasing themselves. When the final notes faded, Mee kept her eyes closed for a moment longer, suddenly afraid to see the reactions on the faces around her. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. No clattering dishes from the kitchen, No murmured conversations, not even the sound of glasses being set down. Then someone exhaled audibly, a sound almost like a suppressed sob. May opened her eyes. The woman in the red dress had her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes shining with unshed tears. David stood frozen, his earlier smugness completely gone, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. The other diners and staff remained motionless, as if afraid that moving would break whatever spell had fallen over the restaurant. And Professor Harlow was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. His usual mask of academic detachment cracked to reveal something complicated underneath. It was Mrs. Rossi who broke the silence, stepping forward with her hands clasped together. "That was," she began, but seemed unable to find the right words. "Extraordinary," Professor Harlow finished for her, his voice quiet but carrying in the stillness of the room. "Absolutely extraordinary." A ripple went through the gathered crowd. Someone began to applaud. Then another person joined in, and suddenly the whole restaurant was filled with the sound of clapping hands. The conservatory group had spilled entirely out of the private room now, all of them watching May with new interest. May felt her cheeks grow hot. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not like this. The applause continued longer than seemed reasonable, until she finally raised a hand in awkward acknowledgement, hoping it would make them stop. As the clapping died down, Professor Harlow stepped closer to the piano. "That piece," he said. "You composed it yourself?" May nodded, not trusting her voice yet. "When?" She swallowed hard. 4 years ago, after I received my rejection letter from Mitchell. Recognition finally dawned in his eyes. "You auditioned for us." It wasn't a question, but May answered anyway. "Yes, you were on my panel." A murmur went through the conservatory group. Professor Harlow's expression shifted to one of genuine surprise. "I don't recall," he began, then stopped himself. "No, that's not entirely true. There were many auditions that day." 73, May supplied. "I was number 58. The precision of her answer seemed to catch him off guard. "You remember the exact number?" "It's hard to forget the details of the worst day of your life," May said, surprised by her own boldness. The music had left her feeling strangely light, as if a weight had been lifted. What did she have to lose now? They had already rejected her once. Professor Harlow had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Your technical skills were impressive, as I recall. But we found your interpretation of the required pieces to be lacking in emotional depth," May finished for him. "Yes, you made that very clear in your feedback." David, who had been watching this exchange with growing discomfort, cleared his throat. "Well, I think we can all agree that whatever was missing then was certainly present tonight." He gave an awkward laugh. "I owe you an apology for my behavior. The wine—" "It wasn't just the wine," May interrupted, feeling a courage she hadn't known she possessed. "It was the assumption that because I serve food I couldn't possibly have anything valuable to offer musically." The woman in the red dress stepped forward. "She's right, David, you were being a snob." She turned to May and extended her hand. "I'm Dr. Lin, head of composition at Mitchell. That piece you just played, it was remarkable." "Have you written others?" May hesitated before shaking the offered hand. "A few, nothing formal. I never had proper training in composition." "That might be to your advantage," Dr. Lin said with a small smile. "Some of the most interesting new voices come from outside traditional pathways. They haven't been taught what's correct." Professor Harlow was studying May with new intensity. "The piece you just played, it was about failure, wasn't it?" "About being rejected," May met his gaze. "It started that way, but it became about something else too." "Finding your own voice," he said quietly. She nodded. A thoughtful silence fell between them, broken when Tony appeared with a tray of champagne flutes. "Mrs. Rossi thought we might need these," he said, offering the tray to the group. "On the house." Mrs. Rossi herself approached, beaming with pride as if May were her own daughter. "I knew there was something special about you from the day you applied," she said, taking a glass from the tray. "A toast, I think, to May and to music that speaks from the heart." The group raised their glasses, even David, who still looked slightly abashed. May felt overwhelmed by the sudden shift in the room, by the way these people who had intimidated her just minutes ago were now looking at her with respect, even admiration. "I don't understand," she said, looking at Professor Harlow. "What changed?" "The person who played for you 4 years ago and the person sitting here now, We're the same. He shook his head slowly. No, you're not the same at all. He gestured toward the piano. The student who auditioned played perfectly, technically. But she was playing what she thought we wanted to hear. Tonight you played what you needed to say. He smiled slightly. That makes all the difference in the world. Dr. Lin nodded in agreement. Technical skills can be taught. What you just showed us, that comes from somewhere else entirely. As the conversation continued around her, May felt something shift inside her chest. For 4 years, she had carried the weight of that rejection, had allowed it to define her relationship with music. She had worked double shifts and taken extra classes, focusing on practical goals, telling herself that dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford. But sitting here now, with her fingers still warm from the keys, with the echo of her own composition still hanging in the air, she realized something important. She had never stopped being a musician. She had only stopped allowing herself to play. The restaurant had begun to empty, the last few regular customers paying their bills and departing, sending curious glances toward the crowd still gathered around the piano. Mrs. Rossi was deep in conversation with several members of the conservatory group, while Tony efficiently cleared tables around them. Dr. Lin sat down on the piano bench beside May. Would you play it again? The middle section particularly. There was a modulation there that was quite striking. May hesitated only briefly before nodding. She positioned her hands over the keys, and this time when she began to play, she kept her eyes open. She watched her own fingers dance across the ivory, creating something that was entirely hers. As she played, she noticed Professor Harlow watching intently, his head tilted in concentration. The rest of the group had fallen silent, listening with new attention now that the initial shock had worn off. When she finished the second time, Dr. Lin immediately launched into questions about May's compositional process, about her influences, about whether she had considered formal study in composition rather than performance. I haven't considered much of anything related to music for a long time, May admitted. I've been focused on getting through community college, on paying rent, on just surviving. Professor Harlow, who had been listening to their conversation, stepped closer. Perhaps it's time to reconsider, he said. Talent like yours shouldn't be serving pasta. It should be nurtured. May looked up at him, unsure how to respond. Was he actually suggesting what it sounded like? After all this time? Before she could form a reply, Mrs. Rossi appeared at her side. It's nearly midnight and some of us have a restaurant to open tomorrow, she said, though her tone was gentle. May, you've done more than enough tonight. Why don't you head home and get some rest? May nodded gratefully. The emotional roller coaster of the evening had left her exhausted. As she stood, Dr. Lin pressed a business card into her hand. Call me, she said. We should talk about your music. About possibilities. May slipped the card into her pocket, too overwhelmed to examine what those possibilities might entail. She said her goodbyes, accepting compliments and handshakes from people who just hours before hadn't even noticed her existence. As she gathered her things from the staff room, changing back into her own shirt and collecting her bag, Tony appeared in the doorway. You were amazing out there, he said. May smiled tiredly. Thanks for pushing me to play my own piece. How did you know it was mine? He shrugged. The way you played it, like you were having a conversation with yourself. He hesitated, then added, You're coming back tomorrow, right? For your regular shift? It was a simple question, but somehow it felt weighted with importance. Was she coming back? To wait tables and serve drinks after what had just happened? Yeah, she said finally. I'll be here. But as May stepped out into the cool night air, her mind still echoing with music and possibilities, she knew that while she would return tomorrow, something fundamental had changed. She reached into her pocket and felt the edge of Dr. Lin's business card. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to reclaim the path she had abandoned 4 years ago. The next morning, May woke to the insistent buzzing of her phone. She fumbled for it in the half-darkness of her small bedroom, squinting at the screen. 5 missed calls, all from Mrs. Rossi, 12 text messages from Tony and other co-workers, and an email from an address she didn't recognize, until she saw the Mitchell Conservatory signature at the bottom. She sat up quickly, suddenly wide awake. Last night came rushing back, the piano, Professor Harlow, her own music filling the restaurant. Had that really happened, or had she dreamed it all? Her fingers were slightly sore, unused to playing for so long after years away from the piano. No, it had definitely happened. She'd played her own composition for a room full of music professors from the very school that had rejected her. And they had liked it? The phone buzzed again in her hand. Mrs. Rossi calling for the 6th time. May answered. Hello? May, finally. Have you seen it? Mrs. Rossi's voice was pitched higher than normal with excitement. Seen what? May asked, her brain still foggy with sleep. She glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. She'd only been asleep for about 5 hours. The video. It's everywhere. My nephew says it has over 20,000 views already, and it was only posted a few hours ago. May's stomach dropped. What video? From last night. One of the customers recorded you playing and posted it online. Everyone's talking about it. The waitress forced to play piano who stunned a restaurant full of music professors. People are calling the restaurant trying to make reservations just to hear you play. May sat frozen trying to process this information. Someone had recorded her, without her knowledge, and posted it for the world to see. I need to see this, she stammered. Can you send me the link? Already did, check your messages. And May? I know your shift isn't until 4, but is there any chance you could come in early today? The phone won't stop ringing, and I think we need to talk about your schedule moving forward. Maybe adding some regular performance nights? Performance nights? The idea made May's head spin. I'll come in at noon, she heard herself say. I need to get through my exam first. Perfect, and May, I always knew you were special. Mrs. Rossi's voice was warm with genuine affection before she hung up. May sat in her bed, staring at her phone for a long moment before opening her messages. There it was, a link to a video titled, Waitress Forced to Play Piano Silences Snobby Music Professors with Original Masterpiece. Her hand shook slightly as she tapped the link. The video opened, and there she was, sitting at the piano in Mrs. Rossi's borrowed blouse, her face partially visible in profile. The quality wasn't great, clearly shot on a phone from one of the tables near the back, but the audio was surprisingly good. The opening notes of her piece filled her small bedroom, strange and familiar all at once. The video had 27,435 views. May felt dizzy. She scrolled down to the comments, her heart pounding. This gave me chills. The guy who challenged her got absolutely owned. Who is she? Does she have an album? I'm crying. This is what music is supposed to do. As a classical pianist for 20 years, I can say this is genuinely special. Raw talent. On and on they went. Hundreds of comments from strangers all over the country, maybe even the world, responding to her most personal creation. May didn't know whether to feel violated or validated. Maybe both. The email from Mitchell Conservatory still waited. Unread. May took a deep breath and opened it. Dear Ms. Chen, it began. I am writing on behalf of the composition department at Mitchell Conservatory following your remarkable impromptu performance at Bellini's restaurant last night. Dr. Lin and several faculty members were deeply impressed by your original composition and would like to invite you to campus for a meeting to discuss potential opportunities. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to schedule this meeting. Sincerely, Office of the Dean of Admissions. May read the email 3 times, trying to convince herself it was real. They wanted to meet with her. Mitchell Conservatory, the school that had rejected her, that had crushed her confidence and sent her on a completely different path, now wanted to talk about potential opportunities. The irony wasn't lost on her. She should have been ecstatic. Isn't this what she would have wanted 4 years ago? A second chance at her dream? Instead, she felt strangely conflicted. The last 4 years had changed her. She wasn't the same bright-eyed teenager who believed that acceptance to the right school would solve everything. She had built a different life, working at Bellini's, studying business at community college, making plans that had nothing to do with music. Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate, who was already at her morning shift at the hospital. OMG, Mai. You're famous! That's you, right? The piano waitress? May smiled despite herself. Piano waitress? Was that her identity now? She set her phone down and got out of bed. Famous or not, she still had an economics exam at 1 p.m., and she hadn't studied nearly enough. She would deal with viral videos and conservatory invitations later. By the time May arrived at Bellini's that afternoon, the situation had escalated beyond anything she could have imagined. A small crowd had gathered outside the restaurant, and as she approached the back entrance where staff usually entered, a young woman spotted her. That's her, the woman called out, pointing. The piano waitress. Suddenly, May found herself surrounded by people asking questions, holding out phones to record her, telling her how moved they were by her playing. It was overwhelming. She'd never been the center of attention like this before. Tony appeared at the back door, quickly ushering her inside. This is crazy, he said, guiding her through the kitchen. They've been here all day. Mrs. Rossi had to call in extra staff. The restaurant was busier than May had ever seen it for a weekday afternoon. Every table was full and people were waiting by the entrance. Many of them had their phones ready, as if expecting a performance. Mrs. Rossi hurried over, enveloping May in a warm hug. There she is, our star. She pulled back, examining May's face.
How are you holding up?
This is all quite sudden, I know. I'm processing, May admitted. I still can't believe someone recorded me without asking. Mrs. Rossi's expression softened. I know, dear. That wasn't right. But sometimes life takes unexpected turns. She gestured around the packed restaurant. They're all here for you. I've had calls from 3 local news stations wanting to interview you. And a talent agent left his card this morning. May felt lightheaded. I don't know if I'm ready for all this. You don't have to decide anything right now, Mrs. Rossi assured her. But I do need to know if you're willing to play tonight. Just one set. I've already told everyone that you're primarily here as a server, not a performer. May hesitated. Part of her wanted to run away from all this attention. But another part, a part that had been silenced for too long, was curious. What would it feel like to play for an audience that actually wanted to hear her? Okay, she said finally. One set, Mrs. Rossi beamed. Wonderful. Now let's get you settled. I've arranged for you to have a break before your regular shift starts so you can prepare. As May followed Mrs. Rossi to the office, her phone vibrated. Another email from Mitchell Conservatory, this one directly from Dr. Lin. Dear May, I hope this message finds you well, especially given the unexpected attention you're receiving. I've seen the video, though I much preferred experiencing your music in person. I wanted to reach out personally, beyond the formal invitation you've already received. What I heard last night wasn't just technical skill or even natural talent. It was an authentic voice. In my 20 years of teaching composition, I've rarely encountered such raw emotional honesty in a new piece. I believe you have something special to offer, something that can't be taught. If you're willing, I'd like to discuss how Mitchell might help you develop that voice. Whether that means formal education or some other arrangement, I'm open to possibilities. Please call me at your convenience. Sincerely, Dr. Lin. May lowered the phone, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. 4 years ago, a message like this would have been everything she wanted. Now she wasn't sure what she wanted. That evening, as the dinner service reached its peak, Mrs. Rossi clinked a glass to get everyone's attention. The restaurant fell quiet, all eyes turning toward her as she stood beside the piano. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming to Bellini's tonight.
Many of you are here because you've seen a certain video that has been making the rounds. A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the room.
While we are delighted by your interest, I want to remind everyone that this is still a restaurant, not a concert hall. This earned a few chuckles. And the talented young woman you're here to see is first and foremost a valued member of our staff, who has graciously agreed to play one set for us tonight. Mrs. Rossi gestured toward May, who stood nervously by the kitchen door. Please welcome May Chen to the piano. The applause was startling in its intensity. May walked slowly to the piano, acutely aware of the phones raised to capture the moment, of the expectant faces watching her every move. This was so different from last night when she had been background music, invisible until David's challenge had forced her into the spotlight. As she sat down at the bench, she spotted a familiar face near the back of the restaurant. Professor Harlow had returned, this time alone. He nodded slightly when their eyes met, his expression thoughtful. May took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. What should she play? The same piece from last night? The one everyone had seen in the video? Something classical to demonstrate her technical skills? Neither felt right. This moment called for something new. She began to play, letting her fingers find their way. This wasn't a polished composition. It was being born right here, right now, inspired by the strange journey of the past 24 hours. It contained echoes of after falling, but moved in different directions, exploring the feelings of being suddenly visible after years of hiding. As the melody took shape, May realized that something fundamental had shifted inside her. The music wasn't coming from a place of pain anymore, not primarily anyway. There was curiosity there and wonder and even a tentative sense of possibility. When she finished playing, the silence lasted only a moment before the room erupted in applause. People stood from their tables, some wiping tears from their eyes, others smiling broadly. Mrs. Rossi was beaming from beside the bar, and Tony gave her a thumbs up from where he stood with a tray of drinks. Professor Harlow remained seated, but his expression had changed to one of quiet admiration. When the applause finally died down, he made his way through the tables to stand beside the piano. "That was even better than last night," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "You found it, haven't you?" "Found what?" May asked. "Your voice," he replied. "The thing we couldn't teach you 4 years ago because it wasn't ready to emerge." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I owe you an apology, Ms. Chen. Not for rejecting your application, we made the right decision at that time based on what we heard, but for failing to see the potential behind the performance, for not encouraging you to keep playing, keep growing, even if Mitchell wasn't the right place for you then." May was stunned. She'd never expected an apology from this man, had carried the weight of his criticism for years. "Thank you," she said simply, not knowing what else to say. He nodded, then handed her a card. "When you're ready, if you're ready, come see me." No formal audition this time, just a conversation about where you want to go from here. As he walked away, May looked out at the restaurant full of people who had come to hear her play. At Mrs. Rossi, who had believed in her enough to put her at this piano in the first place. At Tony and her other co-workers who were watching her with newfound respect. 4 years ago, rejection had silenced her. Today, being forced to play had given her voice back, not just at the piano, but in her life. Whatever came next, whether it included Mitchell Conservatory or not, she knew one thing for certain. She would never stop playing again. 6 months after that fateful night at Bellini's, May sat at a much grander piano on a proper stage, taking a moment to breathe before her performance. The concert hall at Mitchell Conservatory was filled to capacity, faculty, students, local music lovers, and quite a few regular customers from the restaurant who had become her unexpected fan base. The journey to this moment had been nothing like she'd imagined. After the video went viral, eventually reaching over 2 million views, May had found herself facing opportunities and decisions that seemed impossible just days earlier. Local news stations had run stories about the piano, Waitress as she'd been dubbed. Job offers had come in from upscale hotels and music venues around the city. 3 different record labels had reached out about potential contracts. It had been overwhelming, and for nearly 2 weeks, May had continued her regular shifts at Bellini's, playing short sets each night while trying to figure out what she actually wanted. The answer had come during a long conversation with Dr. Lin in her office at the conservatory. Unlike her failed audition 4 years earlier, this meeting felt like a discussion between equals. They had talked for hours about music, about creativity, about finding one's path in a world that often pushed artists toward conventional routes to success. "You don't need a degree to be a musician," Dr. Lin had said frankly. "You've already proven that. But education can give you tools, connections, and space to develop. The question is, what do you want your music to become?" It was a question May had never really asked herself before. As a child and teenager, she had simply followed the path laid out by her teachers: practice, perform, compete, audition. After rejection, she had abandoned music entirely, but now with people actually responding to her original compositions, she had to consider what her own musical voice might develop into, if given room to grow. In the end, May had made an unconventional choice. She would not enroll as a full-time student at Mitchell. Instead, she accepted a special position created just for her, artist in residence at the conservatory while she completed her business degree at community college. She would take composition classes, give occasional performances, and collaborate with students and faculty, all while maintaining her job at Bellini's, though with a modified schedule. Why keep waiting tables when you could play piano full-time? Her roommate had asked, confused by May's decision to stay at the restaurant. The answer was simple. Bellini's had become more than just a workplace. It was where she had found her voice again, and Mrs. Rossi had supported her dream in a way no one else had, offering her a new position as the restaurant's weekend pianist while accommodating her class schedule for serving shifts. Besides, May had explained, I'm not interested in just being the piano waitress from that viral video. I want to build something that lasts. And that's exactly what she had been doing over these past 6 months. Tonight's performance was the culmination of her first semester as artist in residence, a showcase of original compositions, including the piece that had started it all, now properly titled After Falling, and several new works created during her time at Mitchell. A soft knock on the door pulled May from her thoughts. Mrs. Rossi peeked in, her face warm with pride. 5 minutes, dear. The hall is packed. We had to add extra chairs. Tony and the others are all in the front row. May smiled. Did he bring the sign? Mrs. Rossi laughed. Of course he did. Bellini's finest in big letters. He's impossible. After Mrs. Rossi left, May stood and smoothed down the simple black dress she'd chosen for tonight. No borrowed clothes this time. No pretending to be someone she wasn't. Just herself, her music, and an audience willing to listen. As she walked onto the stage minutes later, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. She spotted familiar faces, Mrs. Rossi and the Bellini staff in the front row with their homemade sign, Dr. Lin and Professor Harlow with the other faculty members, regular customers from the restaurant scattered throughout the audience. There were also many strangers, people who had discovered her through the video or heard about tonight's performance, through local arts listings. May took her seat at the piano and adjusted the microphone that had been set up for her to introduce each piece. Good evening, she began, her voice steadier than she felt. Thank you all for coming tonight. Many of you know me from a video that went around a few months ago. Others know me as the person who brings your pasta and refills your water glass at Bellini's. This earned warm laughter from the audience. But tonight I'm here simply as a musician sharing some stories through music. She turned to the piano and began with After Falling, the piece that had changed everything. As she played, she marveled at how different it felt now, less raw, more purposeful. The pain that had inspired it was still there in the notes, but transformed into something that could connect with others rather than isolate her. The program continued with new compositions, each one representing a different chapter in her journey. There was First Light, a piece about rediscovering hope. 7 Tables, a playful tribute to her years of restaurant work. And Echo Chamber, which explored the strange experience of going viral. For her final piece, May turned to the microphone once more. This last composition is brand new. In fact, I just finished it yesterday. It's called Both Hands, and it's about finding balance between different parts of your life that might seem contradictory, but actually make you whole. As she played this final piece, May felt a sense of completion unlike anything she'd experienced before. The music flowed from a place of acceptance of her past, her present, and the uncertain but exciting future ahead. The melody moved between moments of quiet reflection and bold statements, between technically challenging passages and simple, heartfelt phrases. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of perfect silence before the audience rose to their feet in applause. May stood, taking a bow as flowers were brought to the stage, a colorful bouquet from the Bellini staff, an elegant arrangement from the conservatory faculty. The applause continued as Professor Harlow joined her on stage, shaking her hand warmly before stepping to the microphone. When I first heard May Chen play, it was under rather unusual circumstances, he said, drawing knowing laughter from those familiar with the story. That night I witnessed not just talent, but authenticity, something we talk about constantly in arts education but can't actually teach. He turned to May. What you've accomplished these past 6 months, balancing your studies, your work, and your artistic development, has been nothing short of remarkable. You've reminded all of us why we became musicians in the first place. After the formal reception that followed the concert, May found herself back at Bellini's, where Mrs. Rossi had arranged a more intimate celebration. The restaurant was closed to the public for the night, tables pushed aside to make room for a small gathering of the people who had been part of her journey. As glasses were raised in toast after toast, May slipped away to the baby grand in the corner, the very piano where everything had changed. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, remembering how terrified she'd been that night, how certain that playing would only reopen old wounds. Tony appeared beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered her one. Some difference between then and now, huh? May smiled, accepting the glass. Everything's different. And yet... She glanced around the restaurant at the people who had become like family to her. Some of the most important things are the same. Play something? Tony asked. For old time's sake? May set down her glass and positioned her hands over the keys. But instead of playing one of her compositions, she began a simple, familiar tune. The first piece she'd played that night 6 months ago when she was just filling in for Frank, trying to be invisible. Mrs. Rossi heard the music and came to stand by the piano, followed by others from the gathering. No one spoke. They simply listened as May played, her touch confident and expressive in a way it hadn't been before. When she finished, Mrs. Rossi squeezed her shoulder gently. You know, when I asked you to play that night, I had no idea what would happen. I just knew we needed a pianist. And I just needed to remember who I was, May replied. Later that night, as the celebration wound down, Dr. Lin approached May with a small gift box. This came to my office for you, she explained. From someone who saw the video but couldn't make it tonight. Curious, May opened the box to find a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny piano. Attached was a note card that read, "Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late to try again. Your music gave me courage to return to what I love." It was unsigned, but it didn't matter. The message itself was what May had hoped for all along, that her music might help others the way music had ultimately helped her. As she clasped the bracelet around her wrist, May thought about the strange path that had led her here, how one moment of being forced outside her comfort zone had created ripples that continued to spread in ways she couldn't have imagined. The next day, May would return to her regular Sunday shift at Bellini's, serving lunch to the after-church crowd. In the evening, she would play piano for the dinner service. On Monday, she would attend her business finance class, followed by a composition workshop at Mitchell. Her life existed in multiple worlds now, and somehow, that felt exactly right. The restaurant had emptied except for Mrs. Rossi, who was locking up, and Tony, who was helping with the last of the cleanup. Need a ride home? Tony asked, grabbing his jacket. May shook her head. Thanks, but I think I'll walk tonight. It's beautiful out. And it was, clear and cool with stars visible despite the city lights. As May made her way home, she found herself humming a new melody, something that hadn't existed until this moment. She pulled out her phone and recorded a quick voice note to remember it. This was her life now, finding music in unexpected moments, building bridges between different parts of herself, embracing the journey with both hands. The waitress who played piano had become simply a musician who also waited tables. The distinction might seem subtle to others, but to May, it made all the difference in the world. She had been forced to play piano 6 months ago. Now wild horses couldn't drag her away from it, and whatever came next, whether fame or quiet achievement, whether large concert halls or the corner of Bellini's restaurant, she would face it on her own terms, with her own voice, playing her own song.